Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Samery. Thanks very much for joining. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all the work you do. Everybody's involved in some way, either by learning here or doing something external. Thank you. I want to particularly thank the conference organizers at Gurion Institute, the fabulous program director, Fletch. Fletch is helping me out right now. And in particular to Michael Gurion. His work is essential and his outcomes are productive. Thank you, all of you. I'd like to continue by saying something very clearly at the outset of this presentation concerning false allegations. Presentation is not an attack on victims. It's not a denial of harm, and it's not an ideological statement. It is an examination of systems. We're going to talk about false allegations, not as a cultural panic, not as a moral outrage, but as a structural problem, a problem of design, a problem of incentives, and a problem of process. False allegations exist in many contexts: workplaces, schools, politics, and communities. They include things like sexual assault, allegations of robbery, attacks on professional reputations, or even things like my dog ate my homework. But today, we're going to focus specifically on intimate partner violence and domestic violence contexts to keep things simple. As well, that's where the protections are most automatic and the harm is often irreversible. This is a difficult conversation. It makes people uncomfortable. But discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's often a signal that something important is being touched. As our young boys watch their parents doing battle, often either mom or dad, or both, bad-mouthing the other, mom often comes out as the victim, dad as the bad guy. Our boys get a raw deal from the relationship modeling they see and the inherent bias that men, the future young boy himself, are bad. We can improve our systems, and that's what I'd like to discuss today. Before we go any further, we need to be precise about language because sloppy definitions create bad policy. A false allegation is not the same as an unproven allegation. A false allegation is not the same as a mistaken allegation. A false allegation is not the same as an allegation that fails in court. A false allegation is a claim of abuse, violence, misconduct that is knowingly fabricated, materially misrepresented, or strategically constructed, and is presented as true in order to trigger legal, social, or institutional consequences, most often harmful consequences. In other words, the person making the claim knows it's false or knows it's misleading and proceeds anyway. There are four kinds of resolutions to allegations: a finding of guilt, a dismissal of an unproven claim, a dismissal due to honest misunderstanding, and a dismissal of a knowingly fabricated claim. Only the last category is what we're discussing. Let me give you a simple, non-emotional example. Your friendly neighbor has a 150-pound Great Dane named Peanut. Every morning, you wake up and there are puddles on your lawn. No witnesses, no video, no proof. You know in your gut it's Peanut, but you can't prove it. If you allege a criminal complaint because Peanut is destroying your expensive landscaping, you may find the complaint dismissed because of lack of evidence. That's an unproven allegation, not false, just unproven. Now imagine the city sends you a notice that your water usage is unusually high and suggests you check for leaks both inside and outside your home. You realize the puddles are from your irrigation system. If you withdraw the complaint because you were mistaken, that's an honest error. But if you say nothing and the prosecution continues anyway, knowing the puddles are from your own system because you want to punish your neighbor, that's a false allegation. It's a false allegation because you built the reasoning backwards from the desired outcome. You want to punish that neighbor rather than have her be assessed for a criminal activity and then receive her punishment. So the allegation by itself will punish her, not from evidence, not from truth, but from your intent. That distinction matters, and that's the distinction we'll be addressing. False allegations are not a men's issue. They're not a woman's issue. They are a human issue. They occur across genders. They occur across cultures. They occur across social classes. The harm doesn't flow from gender or identity. It flows from the system's structure. Any system that can tolerate even a low rate of false allegations will harm innocence. And harming innocence is not a side effect of justice, it's a failure of justice. One of the core dynamics we have to understand is this. In many modern systems, victim status confers moral authority. When being seen as harmed grants legitimacy, protection, or power, systems begin to orient around claims of harm rather than verification of harm. That's not malicious, it's structural. Power follows perceived harm. That's easy to understand, and systems move in the direction of least resistance. Why do some avoid the conversation? The topic is avoided for three main reasons. First, people worry that talking about false allegations will minimize real victims. Second, they fear it will empower bad actors. Third, they worry it will put them out of step with their community. These fears are understandable, but they're misplaced. Criticizing a system for presuming victimhood before evidence is not diminishing or denying victims. It's defending due process. Avoiding a problem doesn't prevent harm. It only guarantees that harm will be handled badly. And silence doesn't protect victims, it protects bad policy. We often hear false allegations are really rare. Well, even if that were true, and for decades now, the data increasingly challenges that, rarity is not a justifiable defense. Justice is not a numbers game. We don't dispense justice on a bell curve. We don't justify injustice by statistics. There is a broadly accepted maxim that social policy recognizes in order to achieve the greater good of reducing abuse, violence, or misconduct, it's acceptable to harm a few good, maybe potentially bad actors who are not guilty. In other words, let's unjustly convict some innocents in order to catch more of the guilty. However, there's an other, older, and more fundamental maxim, a well-known and credible ideal that is pursued in every justice system. William Blackstone, the 18th century English jurist, put it this way. It's better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent suffer. Justice should not be about the rate of incidents, a numbers game. Even a low rate of false allegations demands serious safeguards because the cost of error is devastating. and the kind of harm the justice system seeks to punish. They don't want error, and they don't want to punish innocent people. Impact matters more than frequency of incidents. Every justice system is a balancing act. Trust and verification, speed and accuracy, safety and due process. Rules of evidence exist because humans are fallible. Judges are fallible. Institutions are fallible. But what is not accounted for is cultural orthodoxy, the sacred ideas that cannot be questioned. When trust becomes presumption and speed replaces verification, systems drift. If belief is both acceptable and faster than investigation, belief becomes policy. Because claims of victimization in a culturally credible way unlock resources, protection, or authority, victimization claims become currency. In the US, the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, ensures this. This doesn't require bad people. It only requires reliable and predictable incentives. This doesn't require, I'm sorry, that's all the bad news. I have good news too, though, and I'm not the only intelligent person on the block. Recent developments in Argentina show courts re-examining cases built primarily on untested narratives, reaffirming that due process requires objective evidence before condemnation. Well, duh. Some voices are amplified, some voices are doubted, some stories move systems, and others just stall. In many contemporary frameworks, lived experience is treated not just as evidence, but as proof. The lived experience as recalled in the moment it's being told. Because lived experience is what the liver of the experience says it is, lived experience is unchallengeable. In such cases, the system will offer some people empathy or even support. It also removes the possibility of testing claims, another foundational pillar of justice, cross-examining. When feelings replace evidence, credibility becomes positional rather than factual. In other words, my credibility rests on who I am, not on what actually happened. As an example, I felt that my unfriendly neighbor was out to get me, and I feel she should be canceled. Therefore, she deserves to be canceled. Once an allegation is made, certain, predictable, and in some cases desirable, at least to the complainant, actions take place. There's a mandatory arrest, there's no drop prosecution, and automatic isolation. These policies were designed to protect the complainant, but they also remove systemic discretion. When systemic discretion disappears, protection against misuse disappears. When an allegation automatically triggers isolation, the allegation becomes powerful. At that point, the system no longer distinguishes between the claim of wrongdoing and the risk of a bad outcome. It treats the claim as though it had already been proven. Peanut is going to the pound today. In family law, we don't actually separate before a hearing. We simply let time pass and the status quo is maintained. In criminal law, just to err on the side of caution, we separate while we investigate. So, how convenient. If I need to separate now in a family case, Peanut isn't my family, but let's pretend Peanut is my family. I go to the criminal side, and they'll help do that in order to be on the side of caution. Then I get the status quo in my family case. And the status quo is much better now. Thank you so much. Risk avoidance dominates. Guilt is determined by allegation. Process moves faster than truth. That's not benign. It's not neutral. It has consequences. As soon as I take my allegations to the police, they give me a restraining order, and Peanut gets sent up the creek without a paddle until the criminal trial, not family trial, because criminal court proceedings supersede family court. So, although we aren't related, Peanut is thankfully out of my lawn and my life. No proof. So, when does process become punishment? Well, when I get isolated, I lose my home. I have loss of contact with my neighbors, my kids. My kids have loss of contact with me. I have loss of standing in my community, and I lose my identity. I'm no longer what I used to be. I'm now a quasi criminal. That's a huge, huge issue for most, if not everyone. Even when allegations are later dismissed, the damage is already done and remains for a lifetime. When systems act on narrative rather than verification, the system and its process become weaponized. Whether intended or not, it's immaterial what the motivation is when harm is systemic. At that point, the system is no longer an adjudication machine. It's cocked and loaded, fully weaponized for harm. Peanut is out of her home, not with her family, and begins to be forgotten. Let's talk a little bit about data, because this is not speculative. A 2023 national US survey found 10% of adults having been falsely accused of abuse, 13% of men, 8% of women. 58% of respondents said the false accuser was female. 31% said the allegation was part of a custody dispute, something that's often emotionally charged and high conflict. High conflict relationships are often mutual in terms of who the aggressor is, and they're extremely complex. Systems aren't built for nuance. They collapse complexity, and collapse always has a direction. Who's going to get pointed at? In 2020, 8% of Americans reported having been falsely accused of abuse. By 2023, that number had risen to 10%. Among men, it increased from 11 to 13%. Among women, from 6% to 8%. That's not fringe. That's not anecdotal. That's population level data, and it's moving in the wrong direction. False allegations aren't vanishing. They're 20% higher and still rising. False allegations are not isolated events, they ripple. Children lose parents, parents lose homes, families fracture, trust collapses. Parental alienation is defined as being driven by false narratives. And the child, our boys and girls, are the real victims. We're not protecting children when we sever bonds based on untested claims. We're destabilizing them. False allegations are the leading contributor to all wrongful convictions. 61% of exonerations, that is, findings of guilt that were badly judged, 61% of exonerations involve false testimony or perjury. That's not theoretical harm. That's documented injustice. And yet, we continue to design systems that reward accusation over verification. Large-scale international studies show that men who report abuse are routinely not believed, removed from their homes, separated from their children, and believe it or not, arrested themselves. In bilateral violence cases, men are arrested in the overwhelming majority of instances. That's not neutrality. That's bias embedded in the process. When men aren't believed, they stop reporting. When systems reject them, they disengage. When injustice is normalized, resentment grows. That's not healthy. That's not stable. And that's not safe. Our silence doesn't prevent harm. It concentrates it. False allegations create a chilling effect. People stay in abusive relationships. People avoid conflict. And people surrender rights. Not because they're guilty of anything, but because the cost of defense is too high. Institutions don't just enforce rules, they enforce frameworks. When a framework looks to social norms, it becomes ideological. It stops questioning. When it stops questioning, it stops correcting. Bias doesn't require malice to do harm. Structure is enough. That's not how a civil society is built around justice. That's simple coercion. In systems that moralize harm, accusation itself becomes identity. People are not treated as possibly responsible. They're treated as already dangerous. That collapse of the presumption of innocence is devastating and often irreversible. Argentina has shown how reputations and livelihoods are destroyed, even when innocence is later established. Every system teaches people what works. If an allegation brings leverage, people will make allegations. If victimhood brings authority, people will claim victimhood. When victimhood brings financial, social, and judicial status, people will claim victimhood even more. Again, this doesn't require evil. It only requires education. You might say boys and men's advocacy is not about boys and men being better. It is about systems being fair. We're not asking for advantage. We're asking for equality before the law. That's not radical. That's foundational. Justice ought to require evidence, process, verification, and proportionality. Not belief, not speed, not ideology. Justice is slow. That's a feature, not a flaw. What we have to do now is return to evidence-based thresholds. Judicial discretion needs to be restored. Mandatory review points have to be established. Penalties for proven fabrication have to be swift and just as severe as the potential penalties for the crime being fabricated. Those are safeguards that protect everyone. We also need training that recognizes bilateral violence, protocols that don't presume guilt, systems that distinguish claim from fact. Neutrality is not hostility, it's professionalism. We must be able to believe victims while inspecting the evidence, support women while not abandoning men, protect children without destroying parents. Those ideas, none of them are in conflict with the others. So what this is not. This isn't a denial of abuse. It's not an attack on women. It's not a culture war. This is a systems critique, and systems can be improved. False allegations are not a moral failure. They're a structural vulnerability. And every vulnerability will be exploited, intentionally or not. Justice is not achieved by being faster, believing faster. It's achieved by knowing better. Education. If we care about victims, we must care about accuracy. If we care about children, our boys and our girls, we must care about truth. If we care about justice, we must care about process. If we care about our boys and men, we must care about whether the system sees them at all. I hope you gained a little bit from this presentation. In closing, I just want to leave you with one more slide, which has all of the references that I used above. And I hope we all go out there with a little bit more knowledge today than we had yesterday. Thank you very much.